What's up, Giants fans? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Tommy's Takes. I'm your host, Tommy G. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with me, and I appreciate that. Special happy holidays to all the followers, subscribers of the show, all Giants fans in general. Really do thank you from the bottom of my heart. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And it's been a very happy holiday so far for the New York Giants. They head into Minnesota to take on the 11-3 Vikings on Christmas Eve, and they're trying to play Scrooge for the Vikings' number one seed. But this time the Giants aren't playing spoilers. They're one more win and a little bit of help away from securing their first playoff appearance since 2016. You hear that, Giants fans? Something to be very proud of, very excited about. In the first year, new regime, new head coach, new GM, and the Giants are one win and a little bit of help away from securing a playoff spot. Unbelievable. So Saturday could be a big day for the Giants, and Vikings will be wearing all white. So Big Blue will be Big Blue on Saturday. And it should be interesting to see them wear that on the road. Vikings lead the all-time series between the Giants and them 17-12. They also have won the last 3 straight games from the Giants. And this Vikings team is having a very impressive season. They've won 10 of their last 12 games, also coming fresh off completing the largest comeback in NFL history against Indianapolis. 33-0 halftime deficit. Come back to win 39-16 in overtime. Unbelievable. The Giants are coming off a huge win that snapped a 5-game winless streak, and New York lost 4 and tied 1. This game figures to be a big litmus test for the Giants. And if you have your eye on the playoffs and you're a fringe playoff team and you're not one of those top seeds and you may not have one of the best rosters out there, this is the best way to get better. You're taking on a Minnesota team that's going to be in the playoffs, that's stacked at wide receiver. Quarterback is playing very well. This is a big test for the Giants. And I think coming out of this game, we'll know a little bit about how they would fare in the playoffs if they do make it. But like I said, it's a big test. Minnesota's all but locked in here for a playoff spot, and they feature a very balanced team on offense and defense. Vikings have only lost 1 game so far, so Giants are going to be up against a struggle here. And I think coming out of this game, you're going to be able to tell a few different things. How Giants could start to stop the run on some of these better running teams. How the Giants could compete with a playoff-type team. So far, against teams over 500 or better, we'll get to that. But this is going to be a huge test. And Vikings are led by 11-year pro Kirk Cousins, who's having a very good year. He's thrown 24 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, over 3,800 yards, 92 passer rating, and most importantly, engineered 7 fourth-quarter comebacks. So, even though the Giants are playing him, shout out Kirk Cousins. Those are some great numbers. And he also has the 6th most yards passing in the NFL this season already. And a large majority of that goes to superstar wide receiver Justin Jefferson. And he is having a ridiculous season. MVP caliber, 111 catches, 1,623 yards, 7 touchdowns. They move him all over. He can catch the ball in any spot on the field. And it's going to be a big test for the Giants, missing Adoree Jackson again and Xavier McKinney. You're going to need some of these guys to step up because you cannot let Justin Jefferson ruin the game because he's done it plenty of times this season. And that's not all they have. They have Thielen. He's still productive. 66 catches, 686 yards, 6 touchdowns. And they also have Osborne, their third-string receiver in his third year, 45 catches, 460 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So when it comes to the Vikings receiving core, it's basically pick your poison. And it's going to be difficult with a beat-up secondary. And another big target in the passing game, Dalvin Cook. Last week he had 4 catches, 95 yards, and a touchdown in the passing game. And guess what? He could run the ball pretty good too, something the Giants have really struggled against. Giants are allowing 5.4 yards per carry to running backs. That ain't going to cut it. Especially if you want to be a playoff team and you want to be a late December, January team and bad weather in New Jersey or wherever you go, you need to stop the run. And giving up 5.4 yard carries to a running back is not going to happen. And they're going to get a good test with Dalvin Cook. And he's deadly on the ground. He has over 1,000 yards rushing, 8 touchdowns this season. And Vikings offense as a whole is top 10 in the NFL. So it's going to be a big matchup. And this is not for the faint of heart. Giants, like I said, coming off that big Washington win, and they're going right from the fire pan into the fire right here. This is a tough one. But like I said, it's a good test, for the Giants overall. The Vikings defense, I would say mixed bag on the season against the run. Pretty good, I would say. They're ranked. They've actually also allowed the second most yards per attempt when it comes to passing. So their passing defense is not done well. Their run defense, on the other hand, has done much, much better. When you look at how they give up the run and how they attack the run, most of the time you're going to get your yards rushing with them on the outsides. They have Dalvin Tomlinson up the middle. He's a force. Giants fans know Dalvin Tomlinson very well. But it's a mixed bag. They're mediocre. They've allowed 7.6 yards per pass in the NFL, which is bottom 10. Also bottom 10 in completion percentage allowed. So Giants could have some opportunities here with Daniel Jones because they're giving up some yardage and they're giving up some completions. It's kind of the way they run their defense. They do not run a lot of man. They run a lot of zone. They do employ the bend but don't break type of defense that Giants fans have seen here with Wink Martindale. So there are some plays to be had in this defense. And +4 turnover differential, 8th in the NFL, tied with the Giants, who are also +4. And they're 5-3 versus teams that are 500 or better, and 7-1 at home. So, just to quickly recap, offensively, Kirk Cousins having a solid season. Obviously, he has Justin Jefferson, who's been a menace. Dalvin Cook has been doing great on the ground, and you have to watch him in the passing game. One key, though, with this Vikings offense that I noticed kind of going through some of the numbers is they allow a lot of sacks. Cousins has been sacked 40 times this year. That's a career high for him. And what have the Giants been doing on defense to be successful? That fearsome, foursome defensive line. They've been tearing teams up. So you have an area here where when you're looking at the matchups, the Giants' strength is going against the Vikings' weakness. That's something this Giants team needs to exploit, need to get pressure with that front four. You don't want to blitz. Again, you don't want to leave a Fabian Moreau on an island out there. You don't want to leave Darnay Holmes on an island. We've already seen how that's worked out for them. So when you go against this Vikings team, you want to stop the run, stop the tight end, Hawkinson. We're going to get to that matchup a little bit later in the show. Giants have not fared well against tight ends. And on the offensive side of the ball, they give up some yardage in the passing game. Versus running backs, they're third in the NFL, stopping running backs. They've excelled attacking the running back position. They have struggled against rushing quarterbacks, so that's a key for the Giants as well. So when you look at the Vikings, really, really down the middle, mixed bag. They do a little bit of good stuff on offense, a little bit of good stuff on defense. Not too high, not too low, but they're consistent. They're not ranked in the bottom 5 percentile in anything that I checked with the Vikings. They've really done a good job being balanced. You've seen that in the comeback win last week against Indy. I mean, they're down enormously at the half, and they come out, they run their offense, they gun it, they still run the ball, get the ball to Dalvin Cook open in space. He's cooking, he's breaking off big gains. So, tough team, not easy. And, I think if the Giants want to come out with a win, they're going to have to play efficient football, turnover-free football. Obviously, they're coming in the game flying high. First primetime win of the season over Washington. And it was a win that jolted the Giants' playoff chances, let's be honest. A loss would have put them in the 30 percentile of making the playoffs. And now the win puts them in the 88 percentile. So, huge win for the Giants. Sitting right now in the 6th seed. They have about a game and a half lead while they're in the 6th seed. And New York had been on a 5-game winless streak prior to that. So that was a huge, huge win. And the Giants, for the first time in 6 years, can sit back and say, hey, you know what? We're playing meaningful football. We're in a game in December versus a good Vikings team, a team that's going to be in the playoffs. And here we are. And that they should be extremely proud of that. They really should because, hasn't been easy. They started the season fast. Giants are 3-5-1 against teams that are 500 or better. That's going to have to improve, especially as you get down the stretch run right here. But can they play with the big boys, right? That's what we want to ask. Now that it seems like they are going to make it to the playoffs, knock on wood, we don't want to jinx it. Can they play with those big boys when they get there? That's something that we need to see. But this is a new season for the Giants. Like I said, first time making it, this far into December with meaningful football in 6 years, which is a really long time. They've done it on the back of Saquon Barkley, who has really had a resurgence this season. He had been in a slump also, just like the team the last 4 or 5 games. But last week, 18 carries, 87 yards, a touchdown, couple ankle breakers, couple spins, looking like the Saquon Barkley from the first half. That's critical for this Giants team because they go as Saquon Barkley goes. Let's be honest. If Barkley's not running the ball well, obviously he'd been recovering from a little bit of a neck issue that probably stemmed from the shoulder issue that he had versus Green Bay. But he looked ready to go on Sunday, and that's a huge plus for this Giants offense. Barkley's rushed for 1,170 yards, 4.3 yards per carry, and 9 touchdowns. And Daniel Jones again last week. Turnover-free football, some clutch passing. He had the 4th and 9 on that long 97-yard drive, delivered a bunch of dots on that drive, and he's starting to become one of those quarterbacks that's not going to lose you a game. If you want to sit back and say, hey, Daniel Jones is not going to win me a football game, Daniel Jones can't make the play downfield, he's last in this metric, air yards, 20-plus yard completions, that's all fine and dandy. But he also hasn't been a quarterback that's going to lose you any football games. He hasn't turned it over. Fumbles have been in check. Interceptions, he's number 1 in the NFL with the least amount of interceptions per 100 attempts with 4 interceptions. And he's really been playing well. But I will say, eventually a time's going to come where the Giants have to get some big passing plays out of this offense. There's only so much you can nickel and dime down the field. Giants and Daniel Jones are last in the NFL, dead last in 20-plus yard completions. They only have 21 on the season. Kirk Cousins has 42 on the season. So that's something that's going to have to change with Daniel Jones and his Giants passing attack because it's a passing league. And what happens if you can't run the ball? What happens if you go into a Minnesota, who has a solid front and they've been stopping running backs and you can't run the ball? I mean, do you just throw your hands up and say, hey, we're going to run, a couple of dig routes, some short, quick slants, couple of out routes? No, you have to get the ball downfield. Have to be able to attack. You have to be able to scheme guys open. It's not always just about having the number 1 wide receiver. Obviously, that helps, as we can see with Minnesota, but it's about scheming guys open. It's about taking advantage. Also about guys catching balls. You seen last week, Slayton dropped a couple. Bellinger dropped a big first, 3rd down. Can't have that, especially with a passing game that has limited opportunities. So look for the Giants to try to get a little bit more aggressive when it comes to the passing game. They're going to have to because honestly and frankly, it's a miracle they've gotten this far with the passing game and the short passing game and the play action rollouts and what have you. And I still give Daniel Jones a ton of credit. It's still easy to throw interceptions on short to intermediate routes, with defenses in the NFL and the complexities. Still very easy. So still shout out to Daniel Jones. I think he's made progress in what is essentially a contract year from him. He has 17 total touchdowns, 4 interceptions. But still, a lot of clamoring out there by Giants fans that, the coaching staff doesn't trust him or he doesn't trust himself. I think it's a totality of trust, and I think that totality comes in the roster and the offensive line struggling. You seen last week when the offensive line picked up their game and started pass blocking, Jones got into a rhythm. He was able to complete passes. He was able to get Barkley off. That's what happens when you have an offensive line playing well. That's something that's going to have to continue as well. And they need every bit of it. Giants obviously missing their top 3 receivers coming into the season in Shepard, Wandale, and Kenny Golladay, who's still on the team, doesn't get a lot of reps anymore. I think at this point, Golladay and the coaching staff have kind of came to a silent agreement that, hey, we're going to give you a couple reps, but this is not working out for either party, which is fine. They're most likely going to cut him in the offseason, get about a $6 million gain to the cap. There is a lot of dead cap money with that, but you will get about $6 million back to the cap. Giants stand at about $59 million now. So it's been tough without the receivers. It really has. And, something that's really been hurting this team is the pass blocking. You've seen it last week in the first half with Evan Neal struggling tremendously against Montez Sweat. Neal has struggled this season, unfortunately, as a rookie, but he picked up his game in the second half, and so did the passing attack. Ben Bredesen coming back last week was a big boost for the offensive line, but coming into last week's matchup versus Washington, PFF had the Giants' offensive line rated 31st in the NFL. So whether you like PFF, you don't like PFF, it's always somewhere in the middle. Their ratings are never blown out of proportion or, undervalued. So that Giants offensive line has to get better. And I think as they get better, you'll see Brian Daboll call a 4th and 9 and say, you know what, Daniel, go sling that rock down the field, because he's confident in the offensive line that it's going to get the job done, and there's not going to be pressure there. So that's going to be big coming into this game versus Minnesota. Offensive line has to block for Jones and Barkley because defensively, Giants are your classic bend but don't break team. They have been breaking a little more often since they lost Dory Jackson and Xavier McKinney, both two defensive leaders. Jackson should be almost back soon, maybe for Indy. I thought he might be able to get back for Minnesota, but looking more likely to get back for the Indy game. And boy, do they need him. The Giants have been struggling against wide receivers, and they're coming into a game versus the best wide receiver in the NFL, and Justin Jefferson. But the Giants have their X factor as well on defense. Kayvon Thibodeau, the closer. The rookie edge rusher, what a performance last week versus Washington. 13 tackles. Everyone's seen the stat line. 13 tackles, 3 tackles for a loss, forced fumble, sack, fumble recovery, touchdown. He got the old hat trick, the old OCU Manura package deal there, and he has really been phenomenal. The guy has a nonstop motor. He's all over the field. He's making plays that the linebackers should be making. Sometimes that the secondary should be making. He's everywhere. So shout out to Kayvon Thibodeau. Excited to continue seeing his growth, especially in a big game in Minnesota. The rookie at Oregon is just, what could you say? A lot of people were down on him in the beginning of the season. He didn't have certain sack numbers. He wasn't making the splash play. He did have the game winner essentially versus Baltimore. I think he's going to be a superstar. He's going to be a stud in this league. He's joined by Azeez Ojulari, second-year pro, who also has a nose for the ball and sacking the quarterback. And they're joined by the dynamic duo in the middle of that D-line, Pro Bowl defensive nose tackle, Dexter Lawrence. That felt good to say that. Shout out Dexter Lawrence, Saquon making the Pro Bowl. They earned it. Andrew Thomas should have been there too, but whatever. And Leonard Williams. Can't forget Leonard Williams. That rounds out this defensive line for the Giants, and that's an awesome defensive. That's one of the best defensive lines in the league. Might be asking yourself, with a defensive line like that, how does this Giants team struggle against the run so mightily? That's simple. They're giving up 150 yards per game, and they've struggled in the second level. They really have. They've struggled in the second level to read holes, to fill holes, to be disciplined, to read keys. They've struggled to tackle not only at the second level, but in the secondary. And when that happens, there's only so much a defensive line could do. And giving up 150 yards rushing a game, that's going to get you a quick out if you make the playoffs. So curious to see kind of how Wink adjusts to that with Dalvin Cook. Obviously, Dalvin Cook is a dynamic running back. He could do it all. But 150 yards rushing per game, that's rough, man. And you're starting players like McLeod, Moreau, Pinnock. And it's tough because, doesn't get any easier. Once you get Indy out of your system, you're going to play Philly the last game of the year. And then if you make the playoffs, you're going to have to pull the big boy pants up and stop the run, because that's not going to work. Secondary has struggled, especially with interceptions. Giants secondary only has 4 interceptions on the year, dead last in the NFL. McLeod dropped a huge one last week that could have ended the game. So you would like to see them get a couple of picks here versus Minnesota. But that's where it's at as far as breakdowns. Vikings coming in super hot. Giants coming in off a big, big win that restored confidence in them. Giants are riding the back of Saquon Barkley. Vikings are riding the back of Justin Jefferson. Both teams' defenses, kind of middle of the road. Vikings really specialize against stopping running backs. Giants kind of in middle of the road everything except for defensive line. They have an awesome defensive front. So that's where both teams are at. That's kind of a little bit of insight into what's going on with both teams. Before we continue, drop your score in the comments. Who do you think is going to win? Would love to give something out to somebody. Whoever guesses that score correctly, and nobody's guessed the score correctly yet. So can we get a correct score this week? All right, let's get it. Also, before we move on, follow, like, subscribe. Been awesome doing this show this season. Obviously, the season is starting to come to a close. Only a couple more weeks left. We will be making some changes, some improvements to the show eventually down the road. But make sure you subscribe. Make sure you stay tuned. You could always check me out on Twitter at TommyG105. Anybody that follows me over there knows I have takes upon takes upon takes every day. Some you might agree with, some you might disagree with, but they're always going to make you think. So check that out. and drop your score. All right, let's get into injury reports. Obviously, for the Giants, the big ones, Adoree and McKinney, not going to play, unfortunately. Adoree's probably another week or so away. McKinney, I don't know. I don't know what Xavier McKinney. He had an interview last week where he said, he's feeling good. He's hoping to get back soon. But then also in the same breath, he basically sounded like he wouldn't be back soon. So that's going to be interesting to see if he can make it back for a potential playoff run. That would be huge for the Giants if he can get back and do that. For the Vikings, we do this every week when we do the show. And Giants always lead the injury report list. Vikings, you have, let's see here. Bradbury did not practice. Garrett Bradbury, the center. That's it. Bunch of limiteds. He was the only one that didn't practice for the Giants. Anybody? Lemieux didn't practice. Neal, Thibodeau, Varnett, and Leonard Williams were limited. I would expect them to play. But Giants lead the injury report as always. Let's get to some key matchups now. Like I said, big game. And that's a big if the Giants could pull this one off, might get to the playoffs this weekend. I think it'll be a formality if they win against the Vikings, whether it's next week, week 18. This is a huge game. This could be a statement game, a litmus test for the Giants to say, hey, you know what? Minnesota's one of the best teams in the NFL. We went into their stadium. They had their whiteout jerseys on. They've coming off the largest NFL comeback in history, and we went in there and got a W. And for Coach Brian Daboll, Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley, Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams, the leaders on this team, at the very, very least, Saturday, Christmas Eve, you want to go into Minnesota and play a competitive football game. You do not want to happen what happened when you had Philly at home and they blew your doors off. Same thing when you played the Lions, didn't look competitive for most of that second half. That's really the only two times they haven't been competitive, look competitive. Go in there, play competitive football, limit turnovers, contain the run. I won't say stop the run because I don't think this Giants team is fully built to stop the run, but contain the run. You go into Minnesota, you bracket, you run zone with Justin Jefferson. You don't let him beat anybody deep running man, and that fearsome foursome has to get pressure up front. If they do, they could trick Cousins into a turnover or two. And I'm telling you now, if the Giants could pull this game out, a lot of people nationally would be looking at him different. Because I know a lot of people were kind of like, during the opening 6-2 run. And then when the Giants started to fall off a little bit, lose a few games, they were like, all right, that's the Giants team we expected. A win versus Minnesota turns a lot of heads and puts you basically in the driver's seat, 90 miles per hour to make the playoffs. So looking for the Giants to really put together a competitive performance. Let's get into some matchups. First matchup I have, Daniel Jones versus the Vikings secondary. So Vikings allow the most yards per pass in the NFL. That right there is an eye-opener. If that doesn't tell you to attack, if you're Mike Kafka, nothing will. You need protection. Giants got protection last week for Jones. Look what happened. He looked the best he's looked all season, regardless of the box score. More chances. Is this a game where Kafka says, hey, we're going to take more chances? They've given up a lot of yards per attempt through the air. We're going to take some shots. Whether that's to Richie James, whether that's to Darius Slayton, who's usually the big guy, of course. Curious to see if they take more shots. Vikings do like to run a lot of cover two, not a lot of man. So you probably will have to be patient. It's probably not going to be a lot of deep shots down the field against that zone coverage. And who steps up at wide receiver, right? Is it Hodgins? Is it Slayton? Is it Richie James? Who's it going to be? Does Golladay make a comeback in this game? Who steps up? Because someone needs to step up. Last week it was a team effort between Richie James, Hodgins, obviously. Slayton had a couple catches. It was really spread around by Daniel Jones. But someone needs to step up. I think Slayton could step up. Hodgins I like a lot also. He's been good at getting into the zones. So he might fare well against this Vikings defense. But Jones has to continue what he did last week. Don't burp the baby. Don't take forever in the pocket. Be decisive. Be assertive. Look defenders off. He did a good job of that last week, looking defenders off, looking one way, popping the ball another way, pushing that safety to the other side. Continue those trends, Daniel. All right. Wink Martindale versus the Vikings offense. So, no surprise here. Giants are missing their two defensive stars in Dory Jackson and Xavier McKinney. It's going to force Wink again to be creative, to step up with a creative game plan, get pressure on Cousins. Cousins, the quarterback, more than any, that does not like pressure in the pocket, does not like pressure in his face. Get Dexter Lawrence one-on-one so he could pop one up the middle. You seen what happened last week when Dexter Lawrence sacked Heineke, put all 350 pounds on him and forced that fumble that essentially won that game. But I'm expecting Wink to throw some new wrinkles out this week. You're going to have to. You know, when you have Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, TJ Hawkinson, you have a bunch of playmakers over there, and you're still pretty much ailing, you're going to have to be creative. I think Wink has done a great job of that this season and got to stop the run. I think that's been the one knock on Wink. Not to blame him because players make plays. Giants haven't been able to stop the run since week 1. Not even close. So those are two more key matchups. Another key matchup I had that I thought was interesting, and, you know, the older, not even older, but a lot of Giants fans will resonate with this. Giants cannot stop tight ends. Ever, it seems like. I can't remember the last time the Giants team has been able to stop tight ends. And here you go, TJ Hawkinson. He's averaging 6+ targets per game. Giants are allowing 113 passer rating to tight ends. So if you want to look at matchups on paper, that one doesn't look good if you're the Giants. Hawkinson is a big target. He's being utilized in this offense heavily, and you have struggled immensely to stop tight ends. And why is that? Back to the linebacking core. Giants did call up Landon Collins permanently to the 53-man. I think that's going to provide a boost to the Giants. He played well last week versus Washington. But all in all, a tough game. I do think it's going to be a close game. I'm going to say the Giants pull it out 23-20 on a late Graham Gano field goal. I think the defense in front of the Giants does some work. I think they get pressure on Cousins. I think the Vikings will be a little bit spent, especially after that miraculous comeback victory last week. I know they put a lot into that. And the Giants are a team that I think are about to ascend. Big game against Washington, pulled out the victory. They already have 8 wins. This team is essentially playing with house money. And when a team plays with house money, that's a dangerous team. You also have a man possessed in Saquon Barkley, who's been juking and spinning his way to a Pro Bowl season. You have a quarterback that's playing turnover-free football, mistake-free football. Quarterback teammates love to play for him, and who has been ascending, has hit career highs in a lot of his stats. Even though they might not check the box for some people, he's been playing much better than he has in previous seasons. And you have an offensive line that is coming off one of their best halves of football versus Washington, and Ben Bredeson is back. You know, do the Giants mix things up and change it around? Do you see Bredeson at left guard and Gates at center? I know Bobby Johnson and Brian Daboll and Kafka like their bigger offensive linemen. I think that's why they leave Feliciano in there. And Feliciano did a good job in the second half, opening holes for Saquon Barkley. But that's a good problem to have. Better to have too many offensive linemen than not have enough offensive linemen. And on the defensive side of the ball, it's all about the D-line. You know, can Kayvon Thibodeau keep stepping it up? You know, can he keep applying pressure? Can he be that stopper, that can opener, whatever you want to call him, Mr. Primetime? Giants are going to need it. Really not many star players types on this Giants team. I think Xavier McKinney was starting to fill that role a little bit before he went down with the injury. But Kayvon's that dude. He could be a star in this league. He could be a star in New York for a long time, especially with a performance like he had versus Washington. And I expect him to continue to step up here down the stretch. But that's your recap. Giants-Vikings Saturday, Christmas Eve. Huge game. Tons of playoff implications. Vikings trying to close in on the Eagles for the number 1 seed. And Giants could do themselves a little due diligence and a little double duty here. If they could beat the Vikings, that opens up a little bit more of a gap between the Vikings and the Eagles for the number 1 seed in the NFC. That might make the Eagles more apt to sit their starters in Week 18 versus the Giants. So a little bit of double duty. That's it for today's show. Happy holidays to all my followers. Really appreciate you guys and gals. Love you guys and gals. Follow, like, subscribe. Check out the Giants Country team. Season is starting to wind down, but it is heating up. Don't go nowhere. We'll be back with another episode soon. Until then, like I said, happy holidays. Stay safe. Peace.